that most of us were conflated the two words Jesus and Christ. Most of us, frankly, were trained to think that Christ was Jesus' last name. And this is clear, so you don't think I'm preaching something untrue. This is clear in the prologue to John's Gospel, the hymn at the beginning of Colossians, the hymn at the beginning of Ephesians, the first paragraph of Hebrews, the first paragraph of 1 John. I have to cover all my bases. So you don't think I'm making something up, all right? They all say with absolute clarity that Christ existed from all eternity. Jesus has only existed in time, 2,000 years ago. Now we who came along 2,000 years later, we just lumped the two together, Jesus Christ. Actually, it's one of the major Achilles heels in Christian theology because, to put it most concisely, most of us were taught or invited to fall in love with Jesus, but we weren't taught or invited to fall in love with the Christ. The Christ is a cosmic concept, and let me put it straightforwardly. The Christ is the Christian code word for reality, for everything. Jesus becomes the Christ, and in that includes in his journey that he walks for us and with us and in us, the classic archetypal human journey from conception, hidden conception in Bethlehem, to an ordinary life of 30 years like most of our lives are, where you hardly hear about him, to trial, betrayal, death, and resurrection. But this is a statement. Now listen closely. This is not just a one-time anomaly and we Christians get all happy on Easter. Yay! God, the Father raised up Jesus. No, it's a statement about how reality works all the time, everywhere. And we're living in a most wonderful time where physics and astrophysics especially is proving this for us. Quite simply put, nothing dies. Everything is transformed, and the final chapter of history is resurrection. And this was always understood by the great Christian mystics, who were much more Trinitarian than most of us are. But we pulled Jesus out of the Trinity, tried to understand him as a standalone figure, whittled Jesus down, and unfortunately, that's why, to be perfectly blunt, we still have Christians who can be racists. We still have Christians who don't love the big mystery. They don't love the big truth. They don't love what Jesus calls the reign of God. We made Christianity into a tribal religion when it was meant to be a universal cosmic statement about how reality works. Right? Jesus is, to use maybe later language, is the archetype, the corporate personality, the stand-in for everything. Suddenly, the Christian message has huge relevance for the life, but even more relevance for history. The other great flaw, it seems to me, that we've fallen into is to pull the gospel into an individual theory of how you can go to heaven and you can go to heaven and you can go to heaven or hell, or you can go to heaven or hell. What a sad story. And then most people go to hell by our own rules, it seems. And you listen, ever since the late great planet Earth and all this malarkey about Armageddon and Apocalypse Now, the final end of history was not resurrection. Quite the contrary. It was all sliding down to a tragic, tumultuous, and punitive ending. You see, when all of history isn't hopeful, when society isn't hopeful, and any of you who are therapists know this, it's very hard to heal individuals. It's very hard to make you hopeful, when the whole thing is going to hell in a handbasket. Do you see? Christianity was meant to be a cosmic message of hope for history. Now, with that, let's go back to the gospel text, and we're going to see what this final chapter of history looks like. what kind of God we really have. And of course, if we're created in the image of God, how we image God is rather important. If he's punitive, we can be punitive. If he's violent, we can be violent. But what we're going to have here, appearing behind locked doors, where they are hiding for fear of the Jews. Here we have an image of all of history, hiding, almost always out of fear. Look at our contemporary politics in this country. Most of it fear-based, because that's what appeals to the ego at the lowest level of motivation. In the evening of the first day of the week, the beginnings of a new creation, the first day of the week, the doors were locked. They were hiding for fear of the temple authorities. And Jesus came and stood among them, and he said, Shalom. The great Sabbath, the great peace of the Sabbath. And then he showed them the price of this transformative journey. He showed them the wounds in his hands and in his side. So we have Jesus, and let me just give two succinct words to how God, Jesus, is being presented to us. He is coming in the midst of history as the forgiving victim. Let me repeat it. The forgiving victim.